You are listening to Salty Believer Unscripted, a conversation on Christian ministry and the Christian life.
This is Salty Believer Unscripted. I'm Josiah Walker.
Hey, how about that new intro music?
I enjoyed it.
I'm Bryan Catherman. We've changed it up.
Welcome to the show. And I don't really know what's going on today, but prior to sitting down for this week's episode, Bryan, you asked me to read this article on clearlyreformed.org, Kevin DeYoung's blog. It's an article, came out today at the time of the recording of this podcast.
November 27th.
November 27th. It says, On Culture War, Doug Wilson and the Moscow Mood.
I kind of like that Moscow mood sound. It sounds like a Moscow mule, I think. Anyway, yes.
So what are we doing?
Well,
Why did I read this?
First of all, I haven't seen it yet. I hope I don't see it. But we'll probably see it. We'll probably see a response to this. So this article is a response to No Quarter November and some general...
Doug Wilson, it's their...
Yeah, Doug Wilson stuff.
Yearly event.
But I suspect either Canon Press or Doug Wilson or the people who follow that ministry, or I'd even go so far as to say kind of some of the fanboy types, will probably respond. And I hope that it doesn't go back and forth. I hope that whatever happens, Kevin DeYoung just lets it go. But he wrote
himself out there.
He's put it. Yeah, and he even says in his article, I've probably taken the bait, for this problem, so that I'll probably be flamed on or whatever he says. I'll be just lit up somehow. Anyway, so here's what this is, and the reason. So he says it in the beginning of the article, but basically, Kevin DeYoung, who blogs and writes and records things at clearlyreformed.org, which I think that's new. He just started that not too long ago, has provided a critique and sort of an answer to the question, what do you think about Doug Wilson? You've got the article there. I've got it pulled up here on my computer. And that comes up. He says, I can't remember where that is, but he says, people ask him all the time, do you like him? Do you hate him? What should I think about him? He says, as a pastor, he gets asked about this other individual. I'll just read. He says, so what do you think about Doug Wilson is a question I've been asked many times during my recent years in pastoral ministry. And then he goes on to say they're split, like, I am asking you because I love him and I want you to love him, or I'm asking you because I don't like him at all and I want you to not like him, or I'm asking because I really don't know what to think of him.
Right.
So that's kind of it. So that's what caught my attention, because as a pastor, we're elders at the church where we serve together, and you get these questions once in a while, don't you?
Absolutely.
What about
just yesterday, I had somebody share that someone they love is at a church that I know is heretical.
Oh, right.
And I can't really speak to that in that moment.
It's hard to just outright say, hey, that guy you like, or hey, that church, or hey, because you want to walk through these things delicately. Let me ask you a question before we get into this too much. And we do need to probably cover what the overview of what's going on here is. But I don't want to, I'm not so much concerned about the article itself. Right. It's this idea that how do we talk about this? So when you were asked that question, you have some opinions. Right. The person asking you're not in covenant membership with them, right? We don't pastor them. This was a new person you met, a visitor, right? So let me ask you a question. If a covenant member said, "Hey, I really like Bob Snuffy."
Sure.
Okay, and you know that Bob Snuffy has some prosperity gospel leanings, or that Bob Snuffy has some various issues of like being really hostile and might have a sharp, like whatever. We've talked about some of these kinds of situations. If someone comes and says, I really like Bob Snuffy, and they're a covenant member, how much do you speak into it?
Well, definitely a lot more than if it was a guest, and definitely a lot more if it's something I've had personal experience with, or that I know this individual well, the person they're referring to. If I've read Bob Snuffy's books, or I've heard some of his sermons, I could probably caution this person, hey, I would really use some caution or discernment in reading their stuff, or I'd advise against this.
So would you use specifics like, hey, well, in this book, or hey, I know about this? So you would give some examples.
I give some specific examples. Okay. And then we're talking about a situation where I know that person. It's hard. People always want to ask the pastor's opinion on this guy, that guy, and the other guy. But you could spend your whole day, every day, kind of researching people. There's too much.
Oh man, we've
out
had
there,
that, right? Okay, so let's just throw some names out there.
What if you don't know?
Let's just throw some names out there, not opinions, not
Right.
But who are the people that are kind of at the top of the list that you've been asked about lately or over the years? Because Doug Wilson is one that I have been asked about.
Yeah.
And Kevin DeYoung
Right.
is one that I have been asked about. Okay, these two guys, people come and say, what do you think about Kevin DeYoung? Or what do you think about Doug Wilson? And probably just for the sake of transparency, we've had Doug Wilson on the podcast twice.
Yeah.
Years ago, back when we used to have a lot more guests. Man, those were some good
I
times.
miss having
right?
some good guests on here.
Maybe I got too boiled into what we were doing. We should get some guests again. Maybe we should have Kevin DeYoung on. We've had Doug Wilson on twice.
You go ahead and call. Make that call.
I'll
Let's
call.
see if he calls us back.
Hey, Kevin DeYoung.
That's
let's
never
get
going
you
to
on
happen.
Okay. Anyway,
The best part is the people I get asked about, it's not even like they're in the same groups. It's all across the board, right? I get asked about Priscilla Schreier. I get asked about John Piper.
Yep.
I get asked about Stephen Furtick.
Yep.
I get
So
asked
far,
about
all these are on my
Andy
list.
Stanley.
I was getting asked about Andy Stanley until about a week or two ago, and I don't think anybody's going to be asking me in our circles anymore.
That's answered itself. But you get asked about people across denominations, theological viewpoints.
I was asked recently about this guy, and then I started watching because somebody asked. Like, that's the other thing, is somebody I didn't even know. I can't remember his name. He does a podcast called Conversations That Matter. Like, I could probably find him. He does some YouTube videos, and I could probably find his name. But I had somebody ask me about that, and then I pull it up, and I go, oh, yeah, this guy.
John Harris?
Yeah.
Okay.
And now, I don't know.
I don't even know who that is.
He has an about page that's the most not about me you can find. Then I went to this seminary, and then he doesn't want, I don't know why. Maybe we should get, what's his name?
John Harris?
Maybe we should get John Harris on the podcast and ask about what seminary he went to.
Well, and it's hard, too, because...
But his stuff's kind of... But people are asking. I watched this video. What about this guy? Who else is on your list? So I've got we've talked about these guys, the guys you have, Jeff Durbin, because we live out in the West, tons of people.
Well, there's guys I don't want to even name, because if we say their name on the podcast, they'll talk about us on their podcast for 5 weeks.
Like we're not saying, it's okay, let's go there. There's a certain hesitation that when I read Kevin DeYoung's article, I went, oh no.
Right.
He's just asking for... Right. He's going to be in line for... Okay, let's talk about the article. Let's talk about what's going on here. So people don't know who Doug Wilson is or don't know who Kevin DeYoung is. But maybe people will understand, he's going to be in the zone of the flamethrower if he's not careful. So... you want to try to give a long and short of what's... So, okay.
Yeah, so...
There's a critique of Doug Wilson. Who's Doug Wilson?
Doug Wilson pastors a church in Moscow, Idaho, right? He's the pastor there. I think he runs a school. And,
he was really, I think in the 80s and 90s, really big on homeschool and education, kind of wrote a lot of books in that field.
Type stuff. And
he's a Christian nationalist, and he's very open and proud and all about that.
And he runs a blog, I think it's Blog and Mayblog.
Blog and Mayblog, is that it?
His blog, or maybe it's something with Canon Press.
He debated Christopher Hitchens a bunch, the atheist, in the 90s. Was that in the 90s?
I think so.
It was when I was a younger Christian, so I'm trying to remember when that was. 2000. I don't remember when that was.
But basically, I guess every November he has what he calls No Quarter November, where he just basically doesn't hold back as he kind of speaks out against society and the world and different things like that.
Explains that. Let's see here. Here I have it. He's sitting on a boat that he's going to light on fire.
That one's from a couple of years ago.
2021?
Welcome to No Quarter November. My name is Douglas Wilson. I'm glad you decided to join us. Now, some people want to know, what is it about November that makes us want to burn things?
He's about to take a drink or something. And he's
There's
got a
little
cigar.
libation for those evangelicals who think I ought not to be drinking stuff like that. The reason we're doing this,
I don't think the boat he's sitting on is real, by the way.
is not that
He's going to light it on fire with this Molotov cocktail.
To be incendiary, because we don't have a moral obligation to be incendiary. What we're saying is that the world has mysteriously, for some bizarre reason,
I don't know how long this goes, but I think he's going to come to... He's going to say, I'm not going to give qualification to it, right? Do you have
Basically, his point is, he's like, the world is flammable, everything catches fire these days, and all you have to do is say something, and then he gives a couple examples, things that would have gone through in the past without anyone commenting, and now it just gets everyone riled up, and you just need to be ordinary and just let the world around you light on fire.
Well, and then I think in one of these...
Stay your post, he says.
The explanation that I was looking for, besides just that one, is normally I give qualification upon qualification upon qualification, but in November I'm not going to qualify my statements. I'm just going to say them, take them, or leave them. And I think Kevin DeYoung is saying you do that all the time.
Right.
November's not any different, but it's sort of a marketing thing to give away things. But okay, so he starts critiquing Doug Wilson.
Right, and the reason he's critiquing Doug Wilson is because not only is Doug Wilson kind of just, going after the world and, just trying to make a bold stance, but he kind of makes some cheap comments about other Christian denominations or brothers and sisters in Christ.
Yeah.
And, kind of like here in this video, he's drinking and he's
sort of
making some quip about,
he's sort of making fun of it.
People who think you shouldn't drink. And to Kevin DeYoung's point, he's just saying, either you got to kind of decide, like, are we all in the trenches to fight against the world and evil and sin together, or are we separate? Kevin DeYoung,
which is interesting because it almost sounds like an ecumenical kind of like we're all in this. There's a line somewhere. Right Kevin DeYoung obviously disagrees with where Doug's line is compared to Kevin's line.
Kevin DeYoung says, which is it? Are we in the trenches against the enemy, or are we hosting our own late night talk show?
Doug's does kind of feel that way at times.
And when I read that, I thought about R.C. Sproul and John MacArthur. Two great pillars of the faith, two men who were really passionate about the gospel and doctrine and so forth. And I watched a debate with them over baptism, infant baptism and believer's baptism. And I forget who it was. I think it was R.C. Sproul who said, at the end of the day,
there's nobody else I want to have in the trenches with me. I remember that.
Other than John MacArthur, right?
If you're going to do this, and then they were really, really good about dealing with their differences without just taking jabs. Right, without just straight. Now, that's not to say they can't have little quibs here and there, but I think what Kevin DeYoung's saying is it's quibs all the time. Right. It's just jabs all the time.
And nobody's really safe, right, because he's going after other Christians. And Kevin DeYoung makes the point here, too, that, him dressing up and being on this fake boat that he letting lights on fire.
Burns.
The video blazing. For this year where he's got a flamethrower. Kevin DeYoung says, if Rick Warren...
That flamethrower is no joke, by the way.
Oh, yeah, you can buy it for $1,943.
In the video. So if you look up No Quarter November 2023, I think is where that video is. That flamethrower shoots like 20 feet, man. No. Anyway, so you can buy it, and then what does he say about it?
But he says, if Rick Warren did videos like this, like NQN, granted they would have a much different vibe, but the same people that love Wilson's gimmicks would almost certainly lampoon a hyped-up, dressed-up Rick Warren close-up as self-serving cringe. So they're saying if other people did what he did, they'd be upset about it.
What he's critiquing is sort of this fanboy, cheerleader sort of thing, rather than an intellectual conversation. Admittedly, it's interesting to me. I think I've seen a pretty big change in Doug Wilson.
Maybe because we've had him on the podcast.
Maybe
before.
I've seen a big change in me, but when we first had him on the podcast, we were going through what a pastor is, and we had interviewed quite a few other pastors.
Yeah.
I think Jim Hamilton might have been in that series. Dr. Hamilton. We were looking at some various people and said, okay, let's talk through this, and it was articulate and generous and well thought out, and it wasn't just this I'm going to fight for fight's sake, right? And then we had him on again about what a preacher is, or preaching a sermon, like years later. Now, admittedly, I don't think he knew what podcast he was getting on, and then he saw how we were not very high end, and he was like, "What have I gotten myself into?"
This is a no frills podcast.
No, it's a no frills podcast. Yeah, for sure. But he was still generous in that, and I actually still appreciated what he had to say about how you bring the word, and then I don't know if it's just the years. I don't know if it's living in Moscow, Idaho. Maybe that has something to do with it, or he's kind of far removed from a lot of the other parts of the world,
right?
And so maybe living in that bubble, which admittedly might be nice, not having a lot of the rest of the liberal aspects and the anti-Christian aspects of the world that you have to live in. So maybe he gets to lob grenades from outside into it or something. I don't know, because I don't live in Moscow, but I don't know. Something's changed, but Kevin DeYoung has clearly felt like at this point he's had to speak into it because people are asking, and we've reached some
Because
spot.
whatever he's doing, he's drawing attention, right? So you either have people that love Douglas Wilson or hate him or just don't even know what to think. And that's how Kevin DeYoung kind of starts his article. But you see in these videos, Douglas Wilson make comments about Southern Baptists and the G3 conference and different things like that. Yeah. And what I like that Kevin DeYoung brings up is just what is our role as pastors? Yep. What should our demeanor be? What should our attitude be? And Kevin DeYoung makes the point of, like, if I acted and said some of the things he said, I'd be brought before the Presbyterian, the board, and asked, what am I doing here? Yeah. And I think what pastors have to remember is what they model to their congregation, to the outside world, to...
It really sort of rings of like the same stuff we heard in the rise and fall of Mars Hill.
Right.
It's this whole sort of like unaccountable, maybe there is accountability, I don't know, but Kevin DeYoung does raise a point, like what level of accountability is allowing the foul language or the sort of showmanshipy, attitude-y, whatever to go, but it has a lot of feel of like the same stuff we saw in Mark Driscoll at one point, and there's some others like this. I hesitate to mention them because then they turn all their venom on me.
But Kevin DeYoung says,
podcast.
what Puritan would speak this way?
Right.
Know?
And I used to really like Doug. I mean, I would say 10, 15 years ago, as a Christian, he was sort of on the fringes of being sort of a little more unknown, and I found him to like really draw me into solid thinking, and because it was. Felt respectful.
And I think that's what we as Christians and as pastors are supposed to do is call people up to a different way of living, right? Of living contrary to the world. And in his article, Kevin DeYoung reminds his readers that we are sojourners and exiles in the world. He references 1 Peter 2:11. He says, our most important fight is the fight for faith, not the fight for Christendom, right? Like,
now, I do want to say, though, and maybe I would be in disagreement with Kevin DeYoung here. I don't know. If he comes on the podcast, we can ask him.
Sure. Yeah.
But I want to make sure that that for me, I would say there is a time when you can draw lines like R.C. Sproul and John MacArthur, where you could say, hey, I'm not down with that. Hey, that person might be a heretic. Hey, this, that, or the other thing. But I think when that's all you are, I think there's a point here where it says what you win them to is what you win them with, or how you get them is how you keep them. What I've encountered, sort of to bring this back into sort of what we deal with, outside of these debate between Young and Wilson or whatever's going to come of that, we still have to deal with the fanboy factor.
Yeah.
Where and it's hard, but you have guys who love MacArthur so much that they will just beat up on their brothers and sisters in the pew over just a differing view of MacArthur or Washer or Wilson or DeYoung or you name it, right? Piper. And so then they become the absolute and total defender, when in truth, Kevin DeYoung has issues he probably needs to work on in his heart.
Well, we all do.
Doug Wilson has issues, and Mark Dever had an issue, and Kevin DeYoung said, hey, brother, what? And then they had a great conversation in a podcast that I think you can find on Clearly Reformed, but you can probably find it on 9 Mark stuff. Preachers Talk. Pastors Talk. Yeah, we're like, hey, you know what? What you said was not very fair, and let's now talk about it, and let's, as representatives of the Christian faith, we can definitely have differences. We can definitely debate. Let's talk it out. So maybe what would be outstanding, I want to ask, what do you think is going to come of this? Maybe Doug Wilson and Kevin DeYoung will go on Clearly Reformed or blog and Mayblog or whatever the podcasts are, or Salty Believer Unscripted.
Sure. We can facilitate
Let's
that
facilitate the two of them working out their differences.
You're really overthinking the quality of our podcast.
A couple of guys who, hey guys. So, what do you think? I mean, that would be amazing that they could, if they could have that sort of a discourse. That'd be remarkable. What do you think's really going to happen, though?
So Kevin DeYoung, to your point, called out Mark Dever. Wrote him a letter, said, hey, you guys.
He privately.
Yeah. And they dealt with that.
And they're friends,
and Dever called it back, and, they had a good conversation on their podcast. I don't think that's how this will go. I think Doug Wilson will fire some shots back, and, I think he's very opinionated and very convicted in the way he does things. Mm-hmm. But I appreciated the way that DeYoung kind of ended his article here. He just said, talking about Douglas Wilson, that he could use the 8th decade of his life to devote his considerable writing talents to persuading unbelievers to consider Christianity, to passing on the Reformed faith, and to offering a deep, penetrating cultural analysis. I believe he could do all this if he wanted to. Or he can pepper his writing with naughty words, play with blowtorches, and make fun of Southern Baptists. That's the other option. It'd be hard to take both approaches at the same time. And
that's good.
I just feel like sometimes you have the freedom and the liberty as a Christian to say things or do things a certain way, but is that the reputation we want in our community? Is that how we want to make a bold stance, against the world where we live and where we work?
I think the most helpful thing we can do at this point for our listeners is, as pastors who have people that are coming to us and as we're trying to help, how would you, as an elder, shepherding a congregation of people who see these videos or have their fans, how would you counsel or advise them to think about the people they like the most? What would you say to them?
I would say when you look at someone that gets you excited and gets you riled up because of what they say or how they say it or any of that kind of thing, I would ask you to examine that person and say, how would I feel if my pastor acted that way, said those things, had that kind of demeanor?
That's really good. Well, the hard part about that is some people want me to be that way.
Sure.
I'm like,
so that might backfire.
But the Rick Warren example is really good. If this is right and true, it wouldn't bother you if it was Stephen Furtick saying it or Rick Warren saying it.
How about somebody with an opposing viewpoint from you?
Right.
If you're super conservative and someone from a liberal bent said and acted the way this person is,
the same thing, yeah.
Would you be okay with them sharing their viewpoint that way?
That's really good advice. I'm gonna suggest this, and we've, I don't know if we've talked about it on the podcast. I think we have. We're always wrong somewhere. We're not perfect. Okay, so I think first it's helpful to sort of examine your own heart. Why do I like this? Right? What is it about this that I enjoy? I used to watch some videos from some people, and there's a few different people that do this. They do like an apologetic man on the street thing. And the person they're debating with, or they're trying to, like maybe they're talking to Mormons, or they're talking to atheists, or whatever, on the street. And I used to watch, and it finally dawned on me one day. I watch these videos because they're entertaining to watch this person who had the camera and had the control and had the editing make himself look good while he made the other person look bad.
For sure.
And I realized that's entertainment. And I had to say, I can't watch these anymore. Yeah. I got to check my heart. So I would say if you're watching because you just like the dumpster fire, you might want to think about that. But also, it's helpful to say, where does this person get something wrong? Right. How they're saying it might be wrong.
Nobody's perfect.
Maybe what they're saying. Hey, I disagree with this person on this theological view or this way to say it. I think that'd be helpful to go, where are we not perfect?
Right. And before you kind of ask your pastor, ask your mentor what they think about somebody, examine that person against Scripture. Yeah. Chances are your pastor has never maybe even heard of that person or seen any of their stuff.
Right.
But
yeah. And maybe just not what do you think about so-and-so, but maybe how do you think so-and-so could help me in my walk with Jesus?
Right.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Opposed to just, what's your opinion? Thumbs up, thumbs down. How does this actually benefit the kingdom? And what do you think I should read from so-and-so? Or do you think I should? What are your, not just the, do you like him, not like him?
That's like when they asked John MacArthur what he thought of Stephen Furtick. And he just said unqualified.
Just one word.
Yeah. Where do you go from there, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. No, there's some value